Hello and welcome to this tutorial on cutting up a Photoshop document into HTML and CSS and how we might approach things like centering a column, having a repeating background, and also things like floats because they're of particular importance, especially when we're doing HTML and CSS based work. So we've got here a basic Photoshop document with a layout that's just been put together. Not a terribly complicated layout from a design standpoint, but there are a few tricky things that we'll be covering in the HTML CSS part of it. So this particular document does have some guides in the document itself. So if I turn on the guides there with Command H, and of course throughout this tutorial I'm going to be on a Mac here, so if you are on a Windows machine, just remember to substitute Control with Command and Alt with Option, except for couple of tiny little places where you actually do use the Control key on both platforms. Right, let's get started. So the first thing that we see here, and probably the most important thing, is to think about, alright, let's break this design up into major areas. So we can see here we've got sort of like this detail up the top here, which I could say is our header area. We've got our content sort of in the middle there, which we could say is our main content area. And then we've got some stuff down the bottom, which we would consider to be our footer. So this is a fairly standard page design from a top, middle, and bottom perspective. But there are a couple of things in there that are a little bit interesting. We'll cover them as we go along. So probably the first thing we want to do is start getting some of these particular graphic elements out of this Photoshop document and ready for use in our HTML CSS page, which we're going to create in a bit. So the first thing that I probably think we should get out is the page background down there. That's sort of those clouds that are behind the whole thing. So I'm just going to open up the layers palette here, and of course I'm on a small recording screen here, so you probably have it visible, but that's fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off the visibility of all the layers except for the background folder or group and the background layer itself. Now with those two only visible now, so just those two there, I'm going to flatten the document. So layer, flatten image. Discard hidden layers, okay. And I'm now going to use the magic wand tool. If you don't have the magic wand tool visible there, you might have quick selection. Just click and hold and select magic wand. Important other things to do: set its tolerance to 0 and uncheck anti-aliasing. What this will do is this will make sure that wherever we click, it's only going to select whole colors and not any other colors. It's not going to try and select colors that are like or very similar to the color that we select. So what we want to do is just get the hard edge. So I'm going to click just anywhere down here in this light gray area. You can see I've now got a selection here, which if I quickly scroll side to side, you can see covers pretty much the whole document. I now want to invert that selection. So I'm going to press Command-Shift-I. So we've now just got this area here with the cloud images selected, and that's much easier than trying to do it by hand or to eyeball a cropping area, because you miss things like these very subtle details down here that you might not be able to see. Now with this selection inverted as it is, I'm going to go to Image, Crop. And what this does is this reduces this image to the minimum size required for that background element there. Now, something we're going to be using quite a lot is Safe Web. You can either find it under the File menu, File, Safe Web and Devices, or I just tend to use the shortcut, Command, Option, Shift, S. And up pops Safe Web. A little bit while, there we are. Okay, now this provides obviously 4-up layout of the original image that we want to try and save out, along with up to 3 choices there. If you don't see those 3 choices, just make sure you've got the 4-up tab selected at the top, because you can either be an original, optimized, 2, or 4-up. So in this case, we're just going to look at, actually we might just go back to 2-up. We don't need to worry about that too much. Either is fine, doesn't matter which one you do it in, you'll get the results at the end regardless. So what we've got here is a PNG 24, and that's 249K. That's quite large because that's encompassing the whole image. Every piece of color information is maintained. It is lossless. It doesn't lose any visual quality because it's saving the original as is. And that's probably a bit too big for what we need. So I'm just going to go and open up this option here and choose JPEG. because I think that a JPEG, a lossy JPEG, will probably be okay for this background. It's a background element, it's not at the focal point here, but it's also got a lot of rich texture in it, and JPEG compresses that sort of thing well, and there's no transparency. We've matted it against a background there, that grey background. So you can see here, well, it happens to go on in 60 quality. If you make sure the quality is set to 60, you'll see that's actually about 27K, or 1/10 the size of a PNG 24 that we were going to have saved out if we hadn't chosen that option. Adjusting the quality slider, like say we put it up to 100, it gives us slightly better quality, but 89K file size, so it's about 3 times larger. And if we drop it all the way down to 0 quality, we can see here the quality of this image has pretty much gone to complete crap there. It's lost a lot of fidelity, a lot of the edges are really blocky, but it's only 7.3K. So the point of JPEG is to find a nice sort of a harmony between quality versus compression. So we can see here 60 quality. If we zoom in using just Command plus or Command minus, or you can use the zoom tool up there if you feel more comfortable with that, you can see it's got a little bit of blocking around the edge, but nothing that's terribly noticeable. So that should be okay. Hit return to save that out. And on my desktop, I've just got a folder here called Cosmic Eye. Inside that, I've got my Photoshop doc, and I've made another folder called Site, which is just for the files where we'll be working. And I'm going to hit New Folder. And we're going to make a folder called Images inside our Site folder. Okay, so Cosmic Eye, Site, Images, and I'm going to call this page-bg. Of course, using names that are suitable for the web, so no spaces, no funny stuff like that, no capital letters, ideally, all that sort of thing. If you do put spaces in the file name, Safe Web will actually put dashes in or underscores, whichever one you've got set up to use. So page-bg into the images folder, hit return, save out. Now we're just going to undo a couple of those moves there, and I've got my undo set up to Command Z. Just out of interest, if you don't have that set up, what you can do is quickly go to Keyboard Shortcuts under the Edit menu. This is the same on both platforms. And under Edit, just click on the Step Backwards option there, and set that to Command Z by pressing Command Z or Control Z on PC. Then accept that, and what that will do is that means you can then just tap Command Z to undo a number of moves rather than having it undo or redo a move depending on which particular way you've been doing it. So I'm just going to undo a couple of times. Just quickly open my layers palette so I can see what's going on. There we are. Okay, now I can see I've undone to this point just before I flattened it, and that's what I want. I don't want those layers to remain flattened, otherwise if I accidentally saved it, I'd lose all this information. So I'm just going to show those layers again. Alright, we'll come back to this in a sec, but what I want to do first is get this background straight into our HTML page, so we'll build this up little bit by little bit. I'm just going to tab across to Dreamweaver here, and I can see that I've already got a site set up for this. I just went through the Manage Sites process and set up a folder, and in here we can see our root folder, which is the Cosmic Eye site folder, and inside there is the images folder we just created, and in that is page-bg.jpg from Photoshop, which is all well and good. Now within Dreamweaver we want to start a new HTML file. So I'm going to go File, New, HTML, no layout, and of course the very first thing I'm going to do to this particular page is give it a title, because that having an untitled document, never a very good thing, especially when you're doing things professionally. So Cosmic Eye New Winter Season Preview. That'll do. Something relevant to our project. Now I'm in here in Code View, but we've also got Split View as well, which is probably my preferred way of working, because that allows you to look at both the top and bottom part. And completely instinctively what I've just done there is I've tapped Command S, because I know this is a new document and I want to make sure I save it before I do anything else. So you just click on the Site Root button to make sure we're inside our site. And I'm going to call this index.html. So if this was to be published onto a web server, this would be the first file that is seen on this particular website or web page or whatever you want to call it. Okay, happy with that inside the site? Save. So we should see here index.html. If you don't see that, make sure you've saved it into the same root folder as your site. You want to make sure that it's in the same location, otherwise Dreamweaver can get a little bit confused when you start working with images and such later on. Now, normally what we'd do is we'd set up a separate CSS file But what I want to do here is actually work with the CSS inside the HTML, and there is a style tag that lets us do that. However, of course, as with all CSS, apart from inline tags, the style must go inside the head section. So here's the head, starting and ending there. There's the body down there. But we're mostly interested in the head right now. So just between the title and the head, I'm going to go to the end of the title line there and press return. And I'm going to type in style type. And when Dreamweaver starts suggesting things like this, if you see it selected the one you want, you can press tab to have it autocomplete. And after a while, you'll find that you get a bit of muscle memory for what options are available, what you need to type in to get the option you want, and you can become really, really quick and proficient at writing code and having Dreamweaver prompt you for those hints, and then you press tab, and it means you don't have to type out the whole lot. It's much, much quicker. So for example, here I just type in for text CSS, it's selected the one I want, press tab, and we're all good. Of course, for the next thing I do, close off the tag, so open an HTML tag, press / Dreamweaver automatically auto-completes the closure of the tag. So what this allows us to do is write CSS as if we were in a CSS file. So we can just literally write exactly the same styles as we would normally use. Now, we've got our body background, so let's deal with that first. So I'm going to type in body, open curly brace, and a couple of lines down, close curly brace. Always important that you close things off after you open them. Make sure you don't forget. I've just tabbed in one line, and what we're going to do is we're going to set some defaults here. So we're going to say the margin of the page is 0, and the padding of the page is 0. That's going to get rid of that inherent sort of pushed in slight appearance from the edge as if we normally get on a page. So it's going to make sure all our content doesn't have any sort of pushing in from the edge of the page there, which is what we want. We want to have a background color. In fact, we want to have both a background and a color, an image and a color. So I'm going to use the background shorthand, but right now I need to know what the background color is that I should be using. So I'm just going to quickly tab back to Photoshop here, and using the eyedropper tool, I'm going to sample just this grey background, just anywhere away from the images. Yeah. Now that's given me a light grey swatch. So I'm going to click on that and bring my color picker up, and that will give me here the hex color, the hex triplet for the HTML, which is EODF. I'm going to copy that, cancel out of that, thank you, back to Dreamweaver. Background, hash, paste, EODF. Space. Now we want to put in a background image, so I'm going to put in background URL. So I just type in UR and then press tab, and Dreamweaver will then actually give you a select file option here. Images, page BG. That's a background image, looks good. Choose. So you should see here URL, open round bracket, images / page-bg.jpg. If you see something like file : / make sure you've saved your HTML file first before you try and put the URL in there, or also make sure that your HTML file is within the site, it's visible over here in the site panel. Because if that's not possible, it's going to put in an absolute reference to your hard drive, and that's going to cause all sorts of problems if you try and put it online. So, we've got our image in. We now need to tell it where we want it to sit on the page. Now if we look at our Photoshop doc, it's basically sitting centered up at the very top of our document, and it doesn't repeat. So URL page BG, where is it? X position first, center, center spelled C-E-N-T-E-R, top, space, no dash, repeat, semicolon. Now save that, go to split view. Now if we don't see the update immediately, what we have to do is just click on the design view area, which is the lower half there, and we should see this page here looks all well and good. Now it's a little hard to see because this image is quite large and the screen is very, very small. Now if we were to preview this in our web browser, and I happen to use Google Chrome, what we can see here is we get a background image, and if we scale this window, it remains centered, which is what we want. Now if my screen was a lot bigger, I would actually be able to see where it fades off. Now if you have a color shift between the image area and the page background, you'll just need to quickly go back into Photoshop, re-export the image, and make sure you haven't got anything like convert to sRGB set, because what that's going to do is color shift the space to try and color manage it for what is believed to be a decent color thing for the web, but sometimes that causes a few issues, so we really don't want that to happen. Anyway, close that down, back into Dreamweaver. So we've got ourselves a nice looking background there, and that's all well and good. I'm just going to go back to code view. Now the next thing we should probably set up is, how shall we do this? Okay, let's go into, let's quickly go into Photoshop. Here we are, and we'll have a look. So we've got this header section which has a large heading, a subheading, a register button and a logo. We've got the main section there, and we've got the footer down there. Let's just focus on the header up here for the time being. So what we're going to do is actually set up our content in our HTML page and then look about how we go to style this in HTML. So I'm going to click with the text tool selected onto the first line. There's a storm brewing. Command A to select all, and Command C to copy. It saves me having to retype it. Back across to Dreamweaver. We're going to go back into split view here, and I'm going to click down in the lower half here, and I'm going to paste. Now you see it hasn't put any tags around there yet, but that's okay, because as soon as we press return, it wraps that in a paragraph tag, which is what we want. Back to Photoshop, with the text tool still selected, select the second line, select all, copy, back to Dreamweaver, paste. Okay, so we've got two paragraphs. Probably need a third paragraph here, which will be our register button. So I'm just going to put in reg button there to remind me. I might put square brackets around that just to remind me that's going to be an image. And probably one thing I should have done first up there, I'm just going to move my cursor, which you can see this little blinking thing here, in front of the letter T on the first line, and press return, so that pushes the first line down. And I'm going to put in logo. So I'm just going to write myself a little reminder that that's where I'm going to put it. Now, those are all paragraphs at this particular point, and that's okay, but we could be a little more clever and semantically define these as things like headings. That probably makes a little more sense. So the logo, being the first thing on our page, is going to be a heading 1. This is also going to be a heading 1, the storm brewing, and register is going to be a heading 2. So what I've just done there is clicked on each line, first line, second line, third line, and just changed the format to heading 1 and heading 2 respectively. The register button, where it's going to go, can remain as a paragraph for now. Okay, save that. What we probably want to do next is actually start to structure our page. So we've got our content written for the very first header there. We probably now want to say, okay, this is inside a header. So I'm going to select all of this and go Insert, Layout, Objects, Div Tag. Wrap it around the selection, and we want to give this an ID of header. Dreamweaver will automatically insert all the various bits and pieces that we need. What we see now, it's tabbed it in, and it's given it a div ID of header. That's all good. Now we can see down here, we've got our path, our body, our div header, and our paragraph. We now need to wrap our div header in one more tag, which is going to be our outer container tag, or our main container tag. That's what I usually use. So I'm going to select the div header by clicking on it. If you can't see this, you'll just need to make sure you've got the window small enough that that part there is visible. So once more with that selected, and you'll see here it's selected the code there, div to div, insert, layout, div tag. Wrap it around the selection, and it's also going to be an ID because it is a unique element on the page, main-container, and return. So what we see in our code view is we've now got a div with an ID of main container. Inside that is a div with an ID of header, and inside that is our header content. So I'll save that, and what we'll do is start to style that a little bit. So what do we need to do first? Well, if we just have a quick look at our Photoshop doc, we can see here that the content here is in a central column, which I happen to know is 960 pixels wide. If I wanted to know how wide that was, I could use the marquee selection tool and click roughly near the first guide, snap it to the last guide there, bring up the info palette, and there's 960 pixels. Info palette, if you don't have it visible, is under Window Info. So there it is there. And that width tells me it's 960 pixels. So let's jump across back to Dreamweaver, and we're going to say new style, hash main dash container, open curly brace, close curly brace, on a new line, tab in, position, relative, width 960 pixels, margin 0 space auto. Now what these three lines are: position relative tells this main container that it's going to be explicitly relatively positioned to the elements around it, the tags around it, in this case the body tag and its children inside it, which in our case is the ID of header and other tags inside that. We then say it has a width of 960 pixels and a margin of auto. So the top margin and bottom margin are going to be 0, the right and left margins are going to be auto. Now auto is a special keyword that means balance this as best you can. So obviously, if it can't round it perfectly, if it doesn't divide perfectly, it will shift slightly by 1 pixel to either side, and that can depend on the browser you're using. So you've got to be a little bit careful if you're doing precise pixel alignments with a background image. Usually best if you try and avoid that sort of thing or give yourself a bit of leeway. Now this special margin 0 auto needs a little bit of an extra help here. We need to add something to our body style up here. So I'm going to click underneath there, add a new line, text-align, center. Now because we're aligning this to the center, it now aligns the main container with its 0 auto margin, but the content inside there will also be centered. So we need to say for the main container, text-align left. It's kind of like a reset, so it's putting it back to the left there. So let's save that and preview it. There we go. And what we can see here, unfortunately my screen is actually not big enough to see this because I've got an 800 pixel wide screen and we're designing for a 960 pixel wide thing. So what I might try and do is see if I can zoom that out. There we are, that's good. So I've just zoomed the page out using the browser's zoom tools. You can see there, if that was going to be 960 pixels wide, that's where it would go to and from, and it's remaining centered in our page. So that's exactly how we want it to be. That's good. Okay. Moving on. We've now got our main container and our header all sort of ready to be set up. So let's actually have a look at the header next. So I'm going to jump back to Photoshop, and always good to have these two open because you're going to be jumping between them quite a bit. What I'd like to do is define some dimensions for the header itself. So we've got a fairly fixed height up here because we want this to sort of be laid out almost pretty much pixel for pixel. So I'm just going to zoom this in. 300% should do. I'm zooming it in more than 100% because what I want to do is find this top line here, this black line, and using the marquee selection tool, which I've got here, rectangle selection tool, I'm going to make a selection from just above that black line. I'm going to drag it up to the top of the document, and what this is going to do is give me the height from the top of the document to that very first black line, and I can see here in my info palette that that's 264 pixels. So we'll jump back to Dreamweaver and we'll set up our header. So this is in the CSS, hash header, open curly brace, close curly brace, tab. We're going to say position relative, typing is terrible, width 960 pixels and a height of 264 pixels. That's what we want. Now, of interest, what we could do right now is actually set a background of, let's say, red. So I'll preview that in my browser, zoom it out, and what I can see here is this is where the red background for the header is and where it believes that it is placed on the document canvas. Now, an interesting thing there is we can actually see there's a gap at the top here. Now, that is not what we want. We actually want it to be flush with the top. And the reason that gap is there is because this heading 1 here has an inherent margin. So if we want that to sit flush against the top, we'll actually need to remove that margin, although we'll actually probably need to remove it from both those headings because that one's going to be floated, but we'll get to that one in a bit. So you can see there, by setting a background color on certain elements, this allows us to actually see where the browser feels that background is being drawn from and to. And that's a very useful thing in starting to learn to understand how it all fits together. Alright, so I might just remove that background for now. Actually, no, I'll leave it in. Why not? Let's leave it in there and we'll remove it afterwards. I mean, it's fairly obvious that background is there, so why not? Okay, what we probably want to do next is start getting some of our graphics for that header in, because then we can start to place them nicely on the stage. So I'm just going to come across to Photoshop here, and here's my Photoshop dock. I've just zoomed this out and deselected the selection that we had from before. So what we want to do is we want to get out this text here, this Cosmic Eye logo, and this register button. Now we're going to be a little bit edgy with some of these things, and by edgy I mean a little bit forthcoming with the technology. We're going to use some transparent PNGs just to save us a bit of time. But of course, if we were doing this and we needed compatibility with older browsers, such as say Internet Explorer 6, there'd be other ways we'd have to approach the transparency that's normally in these images here, this soft edge transparency for the curves and such. So I'm just going to zoom in and quickly move this up here. First thing, let's get our logo out. Open up the layers palette here. Now what I can see with the direct selection tool here, the move tool, there is an option up here which is normally set to group. That's a default option. I always change this to layer, and the reason for that, don't worry about the auto selecting, that should be unchecked. The reason for that is what I can do is hold down Command or Control on PC, click on anywhere in the logo, and it will actually select that exact layer that I've just clicked on. If you have group selected up here instead of layer, it will actually just pick, say, the folder, it'll just pick head, and that's not really exact enough for what we're after. So what you can see here, this is a smart object with an adjustment layer on top of it. That adjustment layer is responsible for converting that to grayscale. It's just a, pardon me, hue, saturation, lightness adjustment. And what we want to do is collapse the two together so that we end up with a flattened logo, but with still maintaining the transparency because we're not matting it against the background. So let's select either the top or the bottom, it doesn't matter, there's either of those two layers. Hold down Shift and click the other one. So we should have both of them selected like so. I'm going to press Command E to merge them together. So you see they're no longer a smart object, they don't have that little document icon in the corner. This is now flattened, but still transparent pixels, this image. So I'm going to go Command A to select all. If I move up there you can actually see, zoom out, you can see that I've selected the whole document canvas there, and goodness, I have to move all the way back up here. That was a bit of a silly move, but at least you got to see what's going on. So I've selected the whole canvas, and I'm going to press Command C, and this is just basically going to copy that logo. Even though we selected the whole canvas, only this bit's going to be copied because we have only this layer selected at the moment. Press Command N for a new document, and you can come over here. So it's 71 by 83. 72 pixels per inch, 8-bit RGB color, which is good for the web, and we want to make sure that our background is transparent. Okay. Command V, paste. And you can see there, it's now fitting perfectly to this logo. Once again, we invoke Save for Web, Command Option Shift S. It remembers what we had set last time, which was a JPEG, but we want to keep that soft-edged transparency. So PNG 24 is probably the most appropriate option. Similarly, if you're using, say, CS4, you want to make sure that Convert to sRGB color space is unchecked. There's an extra option there, which I'm not sure they might have. Yeah, I think it's hidden underneath here. In CS3, it's there. You need to uncheck that. Make sure it's not got a tick mark next to it. So we zoom in. See, perfect. 5.3K. A little bit on the big side, but still okay. You know, it's not too bad. Hit return, save that out, remembers the folder we were in, and I'm going to call this logo-head. Just head, not header, head. I'm putting wrong keys in there. Excellent, always fun. Alright, logo-head.png, save, and we close that down. It's going to say you haven't saved this, but that's okay. Save for Web is more like an export than a save, so it has actually saved the file out. Don't worry about what this dialog is saying here. This is a slightly different type of saving, if you want to think of it in that term. So don't save that, and like we were doing before, just undo twice to re-establish those two layers. And I'll just close that off to be neat. Next, we probably need to get the text out and the button. I might do the button next, because that's the same process whilst we're thinking of that process there. Alright, so I've got just command clicked on the button. You'll either get the text layer or the button, depending on what you've clicked on. And I'm going to select both Reg Button BG and the Register Now text layer, which are the two layers that comprise this button. Command E, merge. Command A, C, N. Return, paste. Now you'll notice there's a bit of space around there. That's okay, because this Register Now button actually has a slight glow around there. So even if it doesn't look obvious to you, there is actually some pixels around there. Command Option Shift S to save. So this is all just repeating stuff we've done a second ago. Show me the optimized one, please, in 2UP. Sometimes it changes its mind for no reason, shows you something else. That's fine, PNG24, and I'm going to call this register-btn. All lowercase. Okay, close that down, Command W, don't save, undo, undo. And what I want to do is get these two text layers out here as well. So this is text layer 1, this is Storm Brewing, and Register Now for the winter season thing. Now, because these are text layers with an effects set on them, or with effects set on them, layer effects, in this case a drop shadow, we can't just do the select, copy, paste, because the effects haven't been flattened yet. So the easiest way that I find to flatten the effects is just to quickly create a new layer, like so, above this text layer. Select the two, and then follow the same process as we were doing just a second ago. So you should be able to be fairly comfortable with that now. Select, merge, Command A, copy, new, paste, save for web, out. And I'm going to call this title Storm Brewing, with dashes in between. Close that down, undo, undo, undo. Click on the second text layer, new layer, select both, merge, select all, copy, new document, yep, paste, and save for web, title dash register now, close down, undo, 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 and close that back up. So we're now back to where we were just a sec ago. And we've got all we need in images to put this header together, which is excellent. So let's just quickly swap across to Dreamweaver again now. Good old Dreamweaver. And we're going to go and replace these images here, but we're not going to replace this text immediately with images. We're going to use a bit of CSS trickery to keep that HTML text in the page, but to visually replace it with that Helvetica Neue imagery. So let's replace that logo and that register button. I'm going to go to the split view here, and you can see it's quite large. I mean, I might choose the zoom out here. I might choose to zoom out to say 25%, maybe a little bit too much, 50%. That's good. So Dreamweaver is not perfect at viewing things in HTML because it does need to maintain the ability to edit the text as we're doing here, but it does an okay job. The thing to remember, of course, is when you get more complicated CSS, trust what your web browser shows you, not necessarily what the design view shows you. You can also use live view if you're using CS4. It doesn't exist in CS3 here. So I'm just going to select my bracketed logo text that I'd written before and hit delete because I don't want that there anymore. Instead, I want to go Insert, Image. Choose from my Images folder. Don't worry about that temporary file, it's just a file it will clean up that it makes when it previews in the web browser. And I want to choose Logo Head. That looks good. And I'm going to give this an alternative text tag, which is the alt tag, which is useful for tooltips, which is when you hover over something and a little yellow box pops up, but also for accessibility, so that people who may not be able to visually see the page can have their screen readers or similar read the actual content of the images to them. So I'm going to call this Cosmic Eye. Insert that. And there we go, we've got an image all placed, looking good, and because it's got PNG transparency, it is all nice and anti-aliased against the red background there. Next thing we need to do is select the Reg button text that we had before, hit delete, so we get a non-breaking space there, insert, image, register-btn. Register now, and I might put a greater than symbol in there, which Dreamweaver will actually automatically convert to what's an ampersand GT, greater than, because obviously we use the greater than symbol here as part of our tag structure, like that, and like at the end of the paragraph. So if we need to write a greater than symbol in our text, we actually use the 4 characters ampersand GT semicolon, and that is interpreted by the web browser as a greater than symbol. Okay. We now probably need to go through and assign some specific IDs and classes to these various little tags here. Reason being, what we want to do is be able to specifically target these elements on our page. And if we just leave them as tags like H1, H2, paragraph, there's no necessarily easy way to target them. For example, if we said, okay, let's the logo's in an H1, so let's target all H1s inside the header, we've got 2 H1s. We don't want them both to be the same. So we need to make sure we give them classes and IDs to make them a little bit more unique on the page so we can refer to them in CSS. So in code view up here, I'm going to click just after the number 1 and just before the greater than symbol, press a space so you can see the tag still inside there. And I'm going to give this one a class of logo. Reason a class and not an ID is because this page is going to have 2 logos on it. I probably want to give the same class to the one down in the footer as well, even though they'll be targeted slightly differently. The ID here, we're going to give to this one here. This is a unique element. There's only one line. There's a Storm Brewing in this particular font, so we can give it an ID. I'm going to call this title-storm. And the H2 is going to have an ID of title-register now, like so. Save that, and yeah, why not? What we'll do, this paragraph, we will give it a class of align-right. Now all these names I'm using, I'm just literally making up. I know that I'm going to write these class definitions and these ID definitions later on, but I'm just making them up with names that I believe are relevant to describing the content that they're going to be targeting. So here, title register now targets the title here with the register now text in it, and so on. Logo, because it's a logo. Just use a bit of ingenuity there, it shouldn't be too hard. So, what do we got here? We've got our ID stuff. Okay, we can start writing some CSS. So I'm going to switch back to code view, move up, and after the header here, I'm going to insert a new style definition. So, what we need to do first is deal with this logo. Now, because it's just got a class of logo, we probably need to be a little more specific with it so that we can actually target it in the header specifically. So what we can write is hash header space h1.logo. Open curly brace, close curly brace. So what we're saying here is, first of all, target an element with an ID of header. Inside that, which is a space, find a heading 1, no space here, with the class of logos. That is counted all as one phrase, if you will. So that says, find me an H1 with an ID of logo. If there was a space there, that would say, find me something with an ID of header, then inside that, find an H1, then inside that, find something with a class of logo. But because it's the H1 that has the class of logo, no space there. Tab in, and what we're going to do is we're going to break this out of the relative positioning flow here. We're going to say position absolute. We're going to give it a top of 10 pixels, and I happen to just know this because I measured it in Photoshop document before, and a right of 20 pixels. Its width and its height we need to set as well, and we can just read those off the image tag down below. So there's 71 by 83. So width, 71 pixels, height, 83 pixels. Save. What else? One more thing. Remember before when we were reviewing in our web browser we had that issue with the margins there? We saw the header was being pushed down by the margin of one of the titles. We need to remove its margin. So margin, 0. Save. Let's just check that we're on the right track. Zoom it out. There we go. We can see that the logo is now sitting where we want it to be. Now, important to note, whilst it is sitting where we want it to be, we do have this particular issue of this now no longer has any relation to elements around it. So if you have text that goes over there, it's just going to sit underneath that. And that's one of the drawbacks of an absolutely positioned element. pardon me, absolutely positioned element versus a relatively positioned element. And that is, the absolutely positioned element does not respect anything around it or underneath it. It will just place itself on the canvas and be quite happy doing so. But it is quite a powerful thing to be able to do there. So what we'll do next, we'll get the register button to sit roughly where it should be on the right hand side there, but we'll allow it to actually be pushed down by the two titles above it. So let's see, what are we going to do with these ones? Alright, we might actually have to change that a little bit later. I might have designed that badly with the align right class there. So let's just quickly switch back across to Dreamweaver. And what we'll do is we'll say, next class definition we're going to make is header. Actually, no. Yeah, actually, I'm going to change that. I'm not happy with this class of align right. I think that it's probably going to be not as reliable for what we want to do there. We might actually just make it so that every element inside the header is absolutely positioned, and I think that's going to be okay. But I wouldn't normally do this for, say, any of the main content below, because that's going to cause issues. You want the content below to be as fluid and flexible as possible, so that as you add more or less content, it pushes things around it above and down. You don't want to be having to hard code dimensions, because that can be a bit of a pain. But with things like the header, where we've got a very specific layout, that's okay. So I'm just going to change this class of align right to an ID, and I'm going to call this, actually no, it's going to be a class too. I keep changing my mind all the time. This is one of the benefits of HTML and CSS. You can literally just change your mind as long as you are consistent with what you do. I might call this register-btn. Okay, in the same way we're going to have a logo, we're going to have two logos, we're going to have two register buttons. So, header p.register-btn. Of course, this is back up in the CSS. Here we're going to say position absolute. What are we going to do? We're going to give it a, actually we'll give it a bottom position, why not? Let's quickly go to Photoshop. What a bottom position does is a bottom position will align the text relative to the bottom of its parent container. Now its parent container in this case is the header div. We've given the header div a height, so we know that the header has particular height. Now I'm just going to eyeball this. This is probably not the best way of doing it, but I'd say about there is where the fade finishes, and I'm just going to measure between there and what would be the bottom of the header, which is 26 pixels. Similarly, we've probably got a little bit on the right there. That's 15 pixels. We can always adjust this later on. That's one of the beauties of CSS. You can just adjust values on the fly. It'll just happily update itself. So 15 by 26. Okay, so bottom 26 pixels, right 15 pixels. Now the reason I didn't measure from exactly the edges up to the orange is because of that slight fading glow around the outside of the image there. Save that. We also probably need to give it a width and a height. Width will be how much? 161 pixels. Height 44 pixels. So again, I've just read that from down below here. Finally, margin 0. Save. Make sure we're on the right track. Just in that previous one. Ooh, okay. Try once more. That's a bit better. There we are. That's looking quite decent. Now we need to deal with these titles, and these are where we start using an image replacement trick. Now this is a fairly decent image replacement trick because it doesn't actually replace the text on the page in HTML, as I mentioned before. So just bear with me here. H1 with an ID of title storm, and H2 with an ID of title register now. Okay. Hash header H1 title dash storm. I could just write H1 with an ID of title storm, but I prefer to remind myself that it's also inside the header here and to be consistent with these other elements here. So it's really just a naming consistency thing to make sure we're specifically talking about this ID inside the header. So here's how we do this. Position absolute. I'm going to need to know a little bit about the images themselves. So I'm just going to quickly show my desktop, open up the Cosmic Eye folder, Site, Images. Now the Register Now title, how big is that? It is, are you going to tell me in here? No, you're not, maybe? Ah, there we are, excellent. 915 by 36. Okay, so that's 915 by 36. 630 by 30. 630 by 60. What am I talking about? Okay, so we write those numbers down and we go back to our HTML. And where are you? There you are. Now this one here had a width of 630 pixels and it had a height of 60, but we don't actually give it a height of 60. We cheat a little bit. We give it a height of 0. We give it instead a padding on the top of 60 pixels. So top padding, right, left 0, bottom 0. You'll see why in a sec. We then give it a background URL of there's a storm brewing. No dash repeat. We probably want to give it a top and a left position here. Now I'm just going to quickly jump across to Photoshop because I don't actually know these measurements. So I'll quickly grab this, shove it across there. Zoom out a wee bit. Alright, so that's going to be what? 19 pixels there. And from the top of that one, which seems to be the highest value, 46 down. Top, 46 pixels. Left, 19 pixels. And one other thing we probably need to add in is the margin. Normally I write this fairly neatly, but I'm just sort of writing this a bit messily at the moment. So underneath height, margin 0. Similarly, I'd also probably put top and left up near the top of this CSS here, just to sort of keep them in a consistent position, so that if I need to come back and read this later on, I can see exactly which styles are applied and in which order. Make sure we're doing that right. Okay, now we can see something interesting happening here. You see we've got the image as a background, which has padding on the top, which is pushing the text down. Now the text inherently has no height, but there is an extra CSS property we can add to this to make it interesting, and that property is overflow. Oops. Overflow hidden. So text was there a second ago. Preview it again now. The text is still technically there, but it's hidden. It's hidden inside a 0 pixel high window with 60 pixels of padding on the top. Maybe window is not the best term, but perhaps area, box, whatever you want to call it. So you can see how that's worked. We're going to do exactly the same trick for this one here. So I might save myself a bit of time, and I'm going to copy this. Copy that whole definition, including the curly brace, and paste. This one's going to be H2, title, register, dash, now. Its position will be what? It too will be 19 pixels, but its position from the top will be 127. So top 127 pixels. Title, actually we'll get Dreamweaver to re-import that, so what I can just do is delete all that jazz there, press Control Space, and it is Control on both platforms, and choose that image there, which is 915 by 36, width 915, oops, 915, padding on the top 36. Save, preview. And what we see now we've got no more tags that are causing margin issues for us. The header is now sitting perfectly flush with the top of the document, as it should be. So that's exactly how we want it. We've placed these elements exactly on the page, and we've used a quick little image replacement trick which relies on overflow hidden, a height of 0, and instead using the top margin as the height of the image we wish to put as the background. So that's how that little trick works. Alright, we can probably actually go back up here to where we've defined our header, and we can remove the background like so, because that's working for us now. So I've just removed the red background color. Let's move on. Let's have a look at our Photoshop doc and decide what we're going to do next. Okay, we've got this whole mid section here to deal with. This is going to be fun. So let's have a look. So we've got these 3 lines here, 3 rows. We can say that one of those rows is going to be a div container. Inside there's going to be perhaps a paragraph with the number in it. Then to the right of that, another div which contains these elements here. And then to the right of that, those 2 columns inside. And that might be a heading 3 because those are heading 1s, heading 2. So it probably makes sense to give this the hierarchy of a heading 3. Okay. Now, other things to note. These straight borders here, even though I've drawn them in Photoshop, we don't need to export them as images because CSS provides us with the very basic structure needed to be able to do these sorts of lines, these 4 pixel high lines and these 1 pixel high lines. And even this bit here, we can just export the interior of the image because that white background and that grey border can be added using CSS. Why would you do that and not just export the whole image? Well, reason being, if you wanted to say perhaps update your styles later on and choose a slightly different border, maybe a bigger border, a different border color, maybe not white, maybe black or something like that, it's much easier to be able to change that using CSS than to have to re-export and re-flatten and save out all your images again. So by saving just the image and letting ourselves design our borders using CSS, we can save ourselves a lot of trouble down the track. Well, maybe not trouble, but sort of effort in having to restyle everything. So the first thing I guess we need to do, before we even consider the div structure underneath this in code, is actually get our content in. So whilst I'm here, I can type in a 1 and a full stop. I think that's quick enough. I want to grab this title. So with the text tool selected in Photoshop, click on the title, select all, copy. Back to Dreamweaver. Now we want to make sure this is not going in the header div. So you can see here, by using tabs, I can clearly see that that's where it starts and that's where it ends because they start and end at the same indented depth. So I'm going to put in a new paragraph here, and that paragraph is going to have a number 1. Now that I've done that, and I save it, I can go into split view, ignoring all that nonsense, click down below, and what I can see here is I've now clicked where the number 1 is. The number 1 is just down there. It's a little hard to see. I might zoom it in. Instead of 50%, give me 66. Okay. Actually, sod it. Let's go to 100. 1 to 1. Incidentally, never, ever, ever rely on it. Like if your design looks fine at 25% on the screen, your design's probably too big. Always make sure your design works 100% because that's screen size. So there's the number 1. Press return at the end, and I'm going to paste in my title. I'm going to press return once more, and I'm going to just make myself a note that I'm going to put that little thumbnail image in there. Press return once more, back to Photoshop, copy out that paragraph of text there. There we go. So we've got 4 new paragraphs. We've got the number 1, the title, paragraph for the image, a paragraph for that text there. Now that note is not inside the header div, it's just after the header div there, but just before the main container's closing div. You can check to make sure there by just clicking on any one of those paragraphs, and it should say body, div main container, paragraph. We need to style these, or not style, we need to give these some semantic definition now, so we need to actually say what this is. And the number 1, not so much a heading, I'm just going to leave that as a paragraph. That's okay. This here, however, is a heading, so I've clicked on the second line where it says lorem ipsum delore, etc., and I'm going to change that to a heading 3. The image can remain a paragraph, and that can of course remain a paragraph because that's just basic text. Next thing, we need to wrap them inside some divs. So I'm going to select all 4 of those lines. So you should see a selection somewhat similar to what I've got there. And I've selected this in design view. So from just before the 1, it's just after the last full stop. Insert, layout objects, div tag. And this will have a class. I'm going to call this an info-container because this is the main information on the page, and it's going to contain all the various other bits and pieces. If I wanted to, I could also put like a main dash container there. I'm actually going to leave that, and if I need it, I'll put it in later. But we'll just deal with the info container to start with. So now what we see in code view is we've got our main container, starts, header content, closes. Info container starts, contains what we've just written, it closes and closes. You should have just that amount of divs. Any more, or if they're wrapped incorrectly, make sure you fix it at this point. Now, this is going to be in a column to the left. If we look in our Photoshop doc, it's going to be on its own column here. These 3 paragraphs, the heading, the heading and 2 paragraphs, the heading, that, and that, are going to be sitting in, collectively, a second column. So that needs to be a div. So select the title and the text, but not the number 1. Insert, layout, div. And we'll call this info block. I'm just making up names here. Again, it's a class because there's multiple of them on a page. And we can leave those on their own because the paragraph itself doesn't need to be inside a div. You can make columns out of paragraphs. And here, because we've only got 1 paragraph for the image and 1 paragraph for the text, we can just have them sit next to each other when we come to float them. So what we should see, just to make sure we're all on the right track here, from here, div class is info container. In there is a paragraph with the number 1. Div class is info block, heading 3, 2 paragraphs, and then it closes off 3 times. So closing the info block, closing the info container, closing the main container. Save that. Now we need to be a little more specific with some of this stuff. We need to be able to class this paragraph, and we probably need to class these 2 paragraphs here as well. So up here, immediately after the letter P before the greater than symbol, space, class equals quote. And we'll make it up here. We might call this info number. I'm just going to use NO as an abbreviation for number. I called this index number in the past, but we'll call it info for now. Info block, we've only got one H3, so we can use that to target it. Paragraph. This paragraph here, where we're going to put an image, we'll give it a class of thumb. And similarly, this paragraph here, we'll give it a class of info-content. So we have a container, which contains a number and a block. The block contains a heading, a thumb, and the content. That's good. That gives us enough ability to be specific about the exact content we wish to style. So let's have a look at what we need to do to style our first column. Here in Photoshop, we've got a column here and a column here. But we need to focus on these 2 columns to start with. We won't worry about this jazz just yet. Now, of course, it looks like we haven't really done much. We've only really gotten the header, and it's been quite a while. But most of this is repetitious, so that'll save us a lot of time. So this will actually start to get a little bit quicker as we're going along. First thing we need to do is say, okay, let's focus on this column here only for the numbers. Now that there, we probably want to leave as padding. So that's going to be left padding of 20 pixels. And the reason it's padding is because I want to be able to see the border on top. However, this attribute here on the right, from here to the center of each column, that will be margin, because margin will give us that gap where it doesn't draw the border. We then therefore need to know the width inside the column, which is 152 pixels wide. And this text is 128 point, in size, and if I click on its color, we'll get its hex color there, and I'm actually going to copy that. So 7392B0. Good. That border, using the marquee selection tool, is 4 pixels high in black. Okay. Dreamweaver. First of all, info number. Style, might put a few gaps in there. p.info-no. Paragraph with this class of info number. There we go. Close curly brace. Float left. So we're no longer using absolute positioning or relative positioning, we're floating it. And this is effectively like a third type of positioning, but it's not a position on its own. Floats allow us to create columns, but they can be a little unruly if we don't take care of them and make sure that they sit exactly where we want them to. Width, 152 pixels. Height is not so relevant. We can let it grow to as high as it needs to. No left and right position. Margin, nothing on the top. 20 pixels on the right, nothing on the bottom, nothing on the left. To remind ourselves, I might put a comment in there, slash star, margin padding in order of top, right, bottom, left. Save that there. Easy way to remember that, trouble. Padding. Top, nothing. Right, nothing. Bottom, nothing, but 20 pixels on the left. Border dash top. 4 pixels, solid, black, 000. Font dash family. Times New Roman times serif. That'll do. Font style, italic. Color, COLOR, American spelling, hash, paste, 7392B0. And finally, text-align center, because we want it to center itself in the column. So let's save that and see what we end up with. Hopefully it's the right thing. Previewing it in my browser. Forgot the font size. You can see everything else is working. It's italicized, it's the right color. There we go. One more thing, font dash size 128 pixels. Now I'm being a little bit lazy here. I should be using ems and relative units of measurement, but I'm using pixels because it's just a little bit quicker for now. So preview that once more. And there we go. That's looking better. That's more like it. And you can see the margin creates that gap between here and all this content right here. So that's our info number dealt with. Next one we need to deal with is the info block. Now that's a div. So I'm going to say div.info-block. So block. There we go. Curly brace, close curly brace. Float left. How wide is it? Well, we need to know. So quickly open Photoshop. And because we're going to put 20 pixels of padding on the left and right, I'm not going to measure the padding. What I'm going to do is just measure between the two columns there, the actual interior content, which is 728 pixels. Width, 728 pixels. Padding, nothing on the top or bottom, 20 pixels, right, left. Save that. Actually, before I preview it, one more thing. Border dash top 1 pixel, solid, black, 000. Alright, let's make sure that that's working how we want it to. That's good. We can see we're starting to get somewhere now, eh? Next up, let's style the H3 inside there. Why not? Photoshop will tell us what style we need. It's going to be Times New Roman, but what is it? 36 point and black as well. Not bolded, however. dot info dash block space h3. So target a heading 3 inside a div with a class of info block. Font dash family times font dash style italic. Now, because H3s, as with all heading level things, they're inherently bold. We want to unbold that. So font dash weight normal, font dash size 36 pixels. Save, preview. There we go, that's looking good. Probably that margin is a little bit insane. You can see there's this massive margin between there, so we can probably fix that actually. Margin 0.5 em space 0. What that basically means, normally the margin for paragraphs and headings without any styling is 1 em. Here I'm saying 0.5, so half that, so half your natural paragraph spacing. It's close enough. We could fiddle around with those values until we got it precisely pixel perfect, but I think the spirit of that is captured. That's looking good. Now let's get those two little paragraphs below to sit next to each other. So where are we? They're going to be thumb and info content. New style, div.info-block p.thumb. Curly braces, float left. Let's have a look. How are we going to style this? That's a good question. Now we get this dimension here from the info container, that overall 728 pixel wide thing that we just did. So we don't need to give it padding on the right. Same ways, we probably don't need to give it padding on the left. We probably don't need to give it padding on the right either. We could probably just use margin for that. Here we might actually use padding on that. Yeah, okay. We'll deal with that as we need to. Okay, float left. The width is going to be 152 pixels because it's the same as one of those number columns. It's the same. Each fifth column is 152 pixels wide. Width 152 pixels. Margin, nothing on the top, 20 pixels on the right, nothing on the bottom or left. We'll leave that as is for now. Next one, div.info-block p.info-content. I think that's what I used. Yep, there it is there. Open curly brace, close curly brace, tab in, float left. Width, how wide? Good question. From there to there, 536 pixels. 536 pixels, margin, nothing on the top, right or bottom, but 20 pixels on the left. Now theoretically I could have just put 40 pixels on either of those two paragraphs and just put 0 on the other, but I just prefer to have it such that one comes out to meet there and then the other one pushes in to meet there. It just feels a little better to me. Now we need to style that text, don't we? What is this? This here is Arial, joy of all joys, 14 point in 555. And with an extra bit of line spacing actually, you'll find that under character I've put 24 point between it, but we can approximate that. What I might do is I might say, okay, given that that is our main content on the page, most of our paragraphs will be in that Arial style, I'm actually going to define that on the body tag way back up the top here. So there's our body tag. After text align, we're going to say font-family, Arial, Helvetica sans serif. Font-size, whoops. Here I might be a little bit proper, I'm going to say 81%. And what do we want? Color, #555. Save. Let's preview that. So you can see we've actually now also colored our heading 3, which you probably don't want to do. These ones aren't affected because they're images. So we'll leave that okay. That can be okay. Actually, no. No, I've changed my mind again. Always fun to change your mind. This is one of the lovely things. You can just, it's fairly fluid once you know what you're doing here. Hopefully you start to get a bit of a feel for everything, but you can just basically say, alright, no, not going to put that color there. Instead, we're going to come down and we're just going to make sure this paragraph of info content has that color. Why not? That should make everything back into black that wasn't meant to be grey. And some line height. p.info content, after the color, line dash height, and we'll say 24 pixels. Preview in Chrome, or Safari, whatever works for you. You can see we've now got a bit of extra leading in there. So line height in CSS is your equivalent of leading. We'll come back and do those images later. What I'm going to do now is duplicate this 3 times, or 2 more times. So we've got 3 of them. So our info container is our container that contains each row. Info number, block, heading 3, etc., etc. It's easiest to select this if you click on the number gutter there. So I've selected from here to here. Copy. Now I'm going to add space there into which to paste it, which is just before the last div. Paste once, paste twice, and remove the space. So now we've got 3 groups of the info container. To make them more obvious, I'm going to change the numbers to 2 and 3, like so. Save that, and we might just quickly grab the extra content there, because I have, even though it's all just nonsense content, I'm just going to copy that into number 2, replace the text that's the heading 3 there, paste, paragraph, copy, back to Dreamweaver. And see, once you get a little more familiar with it, you can start working quickly. So, last one, copy, paste, and the content there. And up to there, paste. Perfect. Let's have a look at what this is going to do for us. Ooh, we got a bit of weirdness going on there. Now that's not what we want to have behave. We don't want the 2 and the 3 to all sort of shift around there like that. And the first time you start using floats, you might get very frustrated by this sort of behavior, because floats will try and nestle themselves into any space that's available. And because this content here, then the big number 1 comes down so far, but this doesn't quite come down so far, it's a little bit less, this number 2 here decides that it might try and shuffle itself in there. Of course, then this content here can't fit next to it because it would go outside our main container, so it shifts down onto the next line. But number 3 thinks that it can take up some space there, so it does. And then finally it's one there, it goes down like so. So one of the most important things to think of when we're dealing with floated columns is to generally put those columns inside their own containers, which conveniently we've already done. The info container. So we can style the info container to stop it from doing those annoying little sort of shuffling floats and having different lines shuffle up into lines above. We don't want them to do that. So I'm just going to go above the info number here, because that probably makes the most sense. It's roughly the order in which the CSS appears as I try and match it to my HTML. You can place it wherever you like though if you don't feel comfortable doing that. div.info-container, open curly brace, close curly brace, tab, float left, the width 100%, that's it. That's all you need to write. This info container being the outer container of each row, a float will grow to contain any floats that are inside it. So no matter how many columns they are and how high each column is, how ragged they are, if they're floated, if they're div or such similar that contains them, as we've got here, is floated to the left or right and has a width of 100%, it will grow automatically to match its height to the highest float within it. Complicated in explanation, easiest to see in practice. Let's preview that. Come on. You can do it. Alright, fine. Try again. There we go. So now you can see we don't get any more of that issue with it pushing around and moving up and down. It's a little bit tight against the content there. So what we could do is actually add a little bit of padding to the bottom there. That would probably make the most sense to do. Yeah, let's do that. Info container width, height, blah 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 blah, no height. Padding, top, right, and let's say 20 pixels on the bottom. Preview once more. And there we go, we've got a bit more breathing room. That feels a little more comfortable. Now you note I haven't worried too much about the exact pixel height of each of these columns as per the Photoshop doc here. The reason for that, HTML is a flexible language and we want this to be able to grow as high as it needs to. So if it needs 4 lines there, let it have 4 lines. Let it grow as high as it needs to. Don't force it to sit into a particular height there, because you're going to get issues if your content doesn't fit into that space. So you might want to edit your content down if it's not working for you in the space that you've given it, if you want it to be more consistent, or you just have to give up a little bit of control. And this can creep a lot of people out when they're coming from, say, a print-based design where you're working with exact fixed dimensions. Just give up a little bit of control and let the content dictate how high it wants to be. So that's what it's doing here. You can see now we're actually getting fairly close to the end. We've just got to do the image and the footer and we're done. So let's focus on quickly fixing up the image next, because that's probably going to be the next major thing, and then all we'll have left is the footer. So back to Photoshop with us. Zoom out. Nope, that should be fine. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to flatten the image layer. Flatten image. Where are you? There you are. I'm going to zoom in a wee bit, and up here I'm going to select my first box. I'm just going to do this by eye. Click, and there. Copy, new document, paste, save for web. Now PNG 24 not so appropriate. This is a textural image. JPEG probably the best. Yeah, 60 will do. And I'm saving it to my images folder. I'm going to call this thumb-01. Close and save. Now move this down. Copy, new document, paste, save web. Thumb-02. Close that down, don't save. Oops. Copy, new document, paste, save for web, thumb-03, don't save, and then undo, 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 just make sure I got my layers palette open so I can see where I'm going, undo, there we are, so I've just undone the flattening. Close that up, close that up, close that up. So we've now got our 3 thumbnails out. One final image we might as well get out whilst we're here, whilst we're in a bit of an image getting out mood, is the coloured version of the logo. Again, V tool, Command click, Command A, copy, new, paste, save. This one here, PNG 24, soft edge transparency, logo-foot. Don't save. Nothing to undo. Just deselect. Cool. That's all our images. We're getting very, very close. Very close indeed. Alright. Back to Dreamweaver. Split view. Click. I'm going to need to zoom this out because I can't see so much. What I'm going to do is just replace these placeholder texts here that I wrote, IMG, with images. Insert image. Thumb 1. I'll call this blue thumb. Actually, no, I'll call this a linen thumb because that's what it is. It's linen paper. Same for this doohickey. There you go. Insert image. Thumb 2. Column thumb. And the final one. Insert image. Thumb 3. This one is Chigami. Already it looks better just with those images there. Okay, P class is thumb. Let's fix that up. Up here, margin. Now, I'm going to apply this to the actual paragraph itself, this styling, this border and this background and such. You could apply a span around this, that might be a good way of dealing with it, but for now, we're just going to do this because it's the easiest way. So, a border, 1 pixel, solid, 555, I know that from before. Background, white, FFF, and padding, 4 pixels around each side. Now, because we've got this width here, and remembering our box model is made up of width plus padding plus border plus margin, that's our true width, we need to take into account that we've just added padding and a border to our width. We need to subtract that. How much? Padding on the right and left, 8 pixels. Border on the right and left, 2 pixels, 10 pixels all up, subtract 10 pixels, 142. Now we preview. And isn't that looking pretty good? A bit of a quirk there, but I guess that's just from the browser zooming. Okay, we've got one last thing to do, and that's our footer. Almost there. So let's set up our footer. Down the bottom here, after our last info container. New line. I might write this out manually. Div ID equals footer. Close div. Always close things after you open them, and then use tabs to keep everything neat. What are we going to have in here? We're going to have a paragraph with a class of logo, and I'm just going to put in some text in there. Doesn't matter what text, just put some scribbly text. And then we're going to have the terms and conditions. P class equals, we'll call this copyright. Actually no, we might call it terms because it's not really a copyright notice. If it was a copyright notice, we could call it that. And again, I'm just put some scribbly text. Save that. Go into split view. And down the bottom here, you'll see these new lines that we've just added. The scribbly text. I'm going to delete the squiggly text. And you can see here it's gone, turned it into a non-breaking space. Insert image. Logo foot. So that's the coloured one. Cosmic eye. Looking good. And we probably just need to bring across the terms and conditions from here. So copy. Paste. Now terms and conditions here, you note that's bolded, that's not. And it's in a slightly different colour. That's in 999, that's in 555. So bold that, strong it, it's probably the correct term there. And now we can go and do our final classes and IDs. What I might just do, say here, footer. You could prefix it with a div if you feel comfortable with that, but I'm happy just doing it hash there. I might say position. Actually, no, we probably want it to float left as well because it's going to contain 2 floated columns, the logo on the left and the terms and conditions on the right. So we're going to do the same sort of trick as with our info container. We're going to say width 100% please. That's good. And I might put a bit of padding on the bottom just to make sure that when the text hits the bottom of our web browser, we don't have this sort of really uncomfortable right up against the edge of the canvas feel to it. So top padding, naught, right, bottom, actually bottom 20 pixels, and nothing on the left. Actually, that's implied by the fact that right and left would be the same. I could write that extra 0 on the end, but I couldn't be bothered. So, we now have to get the logo in the right place. Footer p.logo. Oops. Tab in, float left, width 152 pixels. Now it's going to be very similar to our index number above. So we're going to say padding, top, actually right, bottom, left, margin, top, right will be 20 pixels, bottom, left, border dash top, 4 pixels, solid, black, and that should be about, oh, hang on, one more, text dash align center. Let's check that out. It's funny, sometimes it just doesn't want to load. Try again. Alright, try again, fine. Be that way. There we go. Aha! Okay, we probably need to put a bit of padding on the top there. Having it flush up against there is actually quite unpleasant. So, a bit of padding on top. I'll give it, say, 20 pixels. So that's on the footer P logo. Finally, info-content. Oh, what am I talking about? That's not info-content. Terms. Didn't go down far enough. Footer p.terms. Tab in. Now this is a little bit different because it doesn't have the same width as this, because it's inset to match the width of that column. Oh, we've got one more register button to do. Do that in a sec. This one here we measure from there to there, and it comes up as, where's my info palette? There it is, 536. So width of 536 and a margin of 212. Float left, width 536 pixels, margin top, right, bottom 236, and same way as before, 20 pixels of padding on the top. Give it a color of #999. And one thing I'm going to do extra, footer p.terms strong. We can target things like strong. Color 555. So we've restyled the paragraph and then reapplied that 555 color to the title. Down the bottom there. Oh, hello. Must have got something wrong. Bit of a rounding error, I think. Double check that. Did I get that right? With the 234. Ah, typed in the wrong number. 212. Yay me. So instead of 236, 212. That's going to be a bit better. There we go. Now, get out of the way, you. Now that's in line. Looks lovely. Needs that border. Final thing. And then quickly we'll do the register now button, and then we should be done. Huzzah! Border dash top, 1 pixel, solid black, like so. I like to preview often. So things to take away from this. Right, first of all, let's structure just one big set of blocks. Okay, we've got our header at the top. We've got our main content in the middle, our footer at the bottom. Then we look inside each one. Okay, inside our header, what have we got? Okay, we've got a header, some headings, and a button, and the logo, which can be part of a heading as well. Okay, let's position those ones. Let's focus just on writing that content out first, then we'll style it. Next, we'll move on to this midsection. Okay, what have we got here? We've got one block. Inside there, we've got a column and a second column. So let's just focus on those two to start with. and we'll just put the content in just in straight order. Okay, now we've got these two styled. Worry about that. Worry about these two columns. Then once we've done that, we can repeat it. That gets us some nice quick results. Then finally, we focus on the footer. Okay, we've got a logo here. We've got the terms and conditions here. We get that all sorted. We take it one step at a time, break it from big things, and then focus down to small things. Don't try and do all the tiny little details from the get-go. Try and focus on the big stuff first, then bring it down, then bring it down into the smaller details. So that's probably the best way to structure things. Of course, there's many ways you could approach these sort of topics, this sort of challenge, but this gives you quite a number of in-depth and fairly advanced stuff, if I do have to say so, little tricks of how to structure a page. So using CSS, and if you follow some of these things, you should be fine with your own pages. The important thing is make sure that you are getting everything sorted first, taking it bit by bit, checking it as you go. Don't try and write too much and then wonder why it's not working once you've written several things that all might be interfering with each other. Okay, good luck.